Mishnah. So, got it. Okay. So we're going to talk about, there are two parshas in the Torah that speak about a woman who's violated. And one is the parsha of Onus, a woman is raped, and the other is parsha of Mefateh, a woman who is seduced. The case of rape deals with a girl who's a nara, and the case of seduction deals with a girl who's a nara. So machlokes as to whether the penalty that's paid, the knas, in the case of rape applies not only to a nara, but also to a ketana who's at least 3 years old. Rabbi Meir says it only applies to a nara. Nara is when a girl is 12 years old until she's 12 and a half years old. When she's 12 years and 6 months, she becomes a bogeres. The Chachamim say it applies to a girl once she reaches we had this at the very beginning of the parak, Beilu Naras. Once she's a ketana who's 3 years old, so then the knas is paid up until the time that she's 12 and a half years old. The parsha of Mefateh is in Sefer Shmos, and the parsha of Onus is in Sefer Devarim. So Mishnah says, what if I have a nara, she's arsa and garsha? She's a nara, she's still between 12 and 12 and a half years old, but she became betrothed. Arsa means betrothed, more than engagement. She was actually betrothed, but she never had relations with her husband because she got divorced before they became fully married, before they had nisuin. So now she becomes raped. She gets raped. So is there a knas that's payable in this case, or do we say that just like if she would be a beula, that she would be already would have gotten married and would have had relations with her husband, then there would be no knas payable. So too, if she's a divorcee, even if her body is still intact, she's still a virgin. So Rabbi Yosef Glili Omer ein la knas. Rabbi Yosef Glili says there's no knas, and he'll explain why in the Gemara. Rabbi Kiva Omer yesh la knas uknasa le'atzma. Rabbi Kiva says there is a knas that's payable, but unlike the general rule, which is that the knas is payable to the girl's father, in this case, since she went off and got married on some level, she was in her own rishus, so therefore she gets to keep the knas for herself. That's what Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah says. There's another version of Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa that says that she has a knas and the knas goes to the father, just like a regular knas. There are two versions of Rabbi Akiva. The halacha, as paskin in the Shulchan Aruch, but paskin by the Rambam, is like the Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, that she gets the knas whenever there's a machlokes, Rabbi Akiva v'chavero, Rabbi Akiva and somebody else, another time in the Mishnah, so halachas Rabbi Akiva mechavero. So therefore, we pass like Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah that she does have a knas and she gets to keep it. So the Gemara says, "My time is Rabbi Yosef Glili." What's the reasoning of Rabbi Yosef Glili that there's no knas payable in this case? So it says, when is it the pasuk in Devarim about rape? When is it that the knas is payable? It says, "Asher lo orasa." The when she has not yet become betrothed. Asher lo orasa ha'orsa ein lo knas. So she became betrothed, even if she gets divorced afterwards before she has relations. Nonetheless, it's a clear gzeras hakasa, so she doesn't get a knas. Case closed. Rabbi Kiva Mano, Asher lo orasa, it just means le'avia, that in this particular case, the father doesn't get the knas. Orsa le'atzma. If she became betrothed and she hasn't yet become a bula, then she becomes divorced. If she'd still be betrothed, so then a man who had relations with her would get skila, so then there would be no payment rendered. But if there would be a divorce, a case of niskarsha, so then there is a knas. It's just that what the pasuk is teaching us is that it's treated differently. Then in this case, she would get to keep the knas. But according to that reasoning of Rabbi Akiva, so when the pasuk says nara, says in the pasuk in Devarim, Kim Ish Nara Vesula, so Nara should teach me, which teaches me below Bogeres, that if she's a Bogeres, she's 12 and a half years old, she doesn't get a knas, there's no knas anymore. So why don't we say there is a knas, she just gets to keep it. When we say Besula means below Beula, that if she would already have had relations, that despite the fact that she's still an Ara, there's no knas payable. So maybe why shouldn't Rabbi Akiva say the same thing? That the exclusion of the pasuk just means the father doesn't get the knas, but she gets the knas, just like in the case where she became betrothed and divorced. Legami, rather it means legami. If she's a beula, she's a bogeres, there's no knas altogether. So it should be the same thing here. If she became betrothed and divorced, there should be no knas altogether, like Rabbi Yosef Glili says. So I'm like Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva says, no. Let me explain to you. Hi lo rasa mi the lo rasa, the way I understand lo ashir lo rasa and why it's treated differently from the various exclusions that we learn from Nara and from Besula is based on the following brisa. It's a very unusual thing. Because normally when the Gemara says that mi l'chadetanya, so you'll have some brisa where other people are talking. But here Rabbi Akiva is directing you to a brisa where he's talking. That really doesn't occur too much in Shas, but that's what we have over here. Mi l'chadetanya ashir orasa prat l'nara shenisarsa v'nisgarsha she'en lo knas. Comes to exclude, this is Rabbi Yosef Glili talking, that a girl who becomes betrothed and then divorced, she doesn't get a knas. Rabbi Yosef Glili, Rabbi Akiva me yesh knas, knas levia. Here's the alternative version of Rabbi Akiva, that no, there is a knas, but who gets to keep the knas? The father gets to keep the knas. It's a strange thing, because that's what the din would be if she was not betrothed. So why would the din be the same if she is betrothed? Then why did the pasuk make a special point of saying that the normal halacha applies when she's not betrothed? If the same halacha that the knas is paid and it goes to the father is applicable even when she is betrothed and becomes divorced, that's going to be a question on this particular version of Rabbi Akiva, but that's what this version says. But didn't know saying the explanation is the Be'avia Zakai v'Kesef Kiddusha, Be'avia Zakai v'Kesef Knasa, and that we know that the father Spitina Sati Lisha Zed, it's going to be a sugi later on in Daf Memvav, all the things that a father is entitled to from his daughter when she's a Nara, Binora Vesavia, Koshevach Neurim Leavia, that we derive from various psukim that the father gets to keep the Kesef Kiddushin that is paid to marry her. And the pasuk here with respect to rape says that when the knas is paid for the fact that his daughter is raped, the money goes to him. So ma kesef kiddusha, kesef kiddusha. So just like in the case of kesef kiddusha, there's no exclusion in the Gezeres HaKasuv that says that the money does not go to the father if she had previously been betrothed and divorced. But rather, the money always goes to the father. Af kesef knasa. So too the kesef of the knas that gets paid to the father. Even though she was betrothed and then divorced, it still goes to the father. So then why does the pasuk have the words Ashir lo orasa? According to Rabbi Akiva, if the din is good, especially this version of Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa, if this din is going to be exactly the same, whether she was betrothed or whether she wasn't betrothed, so why does the pasuk throw in the words Ashir lo orasa? So mufna lahakish lo la'adunei menu. It's for the purpose of teaching me a gezerah shava. La'adunei menu gezerah shava. Nemar Khan, it says in the case of Knas Ashir lo orasa, and it says in the case of Mefateh Ashir lo orasa, right? B'chiyipate ish besula Ashir lo orasa has the same lashon Ashir lo orasa. So Makan, just like in the case of rape in Sefer Devarim, the Torah spells out that the payment is chamishim kesef aflahala nun. So too in the case of Mefateh, the payment is chamishim kesef. Ma'alahalan shkolim, and just like in the case of Mefateh, whatever amount is paid, the pasuk says kesef yishkol kemar habisulos. It uses the lashon of shkolim, has to be paid in silver coins and not just copper coins, more valuable coins. Ma'alahalan shkolim, afkan shkolim. So too in the case of onus, it has to be shkolim. So we learn 50 shkolim from the Gezerah Shava between the two different parashios of Onus and Mefateh. By Onus it says 50, and by Mefateh it says shkolim. And through the Gezerah Shava it says in one place Ashir lo orasa, it says in the other place Ashir lo orasa. We apply the din of one to the other. Rabbi Akiva, my chazis Ashir lo orasa Gezerah Shava. So Rabbi Akiva, what is it that caused him to assume that the words Ashir lo orasa is what teaches me this Gezerah Shava, that I apply the dinim of one to the other? Besula lemute beula, but when it says besula, that's to teach me a complete din, that only if the girl is a besula is there a knas payable, but not if she was a beula, if she had already had relations. Ema, let's turn the page now. Lameches samid beis, and besula gzeira shava. Maybe the word besula, the fact that it says both by Mefateh and onus, it has the words besula. In the case of onus, it says kimsa ish nara besula. In the case of Mefateh, it says v'chiyipate ish besula. So why don't we use the two besulas to teach me a gezerah shava? and not to exclude the case of beula. And the case and a woman who's a beula would still get a knas. And use the wording of Ashir Orasa to teach me the actual din, that if a Gunara would become betrothed and then divorced and then would become raped, then there would no longer be a requirement for a knas to be paid, like Rabbi Yossi Glili learns. So Mistaba, we say no. Ashir Orasa l'gzeira shava. It makes more sense to use the phraseology of Ashir Orasa for the gzeira shava. Sherini koreba nara besula, because this is because then I can still call her in Nara besula. I say the knas is paid, because what was the main requirement for knas to be paid? The opening salvo of the pasuk with respect to rape was kim sa'ish nara besula. She's still an nara besula. She's still between 12 and 12 and a half years old, and she's still a besula. She never had relations, so it makes sense that the payment of a knas should still be paid. So adarabba, we say no. I could say in the opposite direction. Besula l'gzeira shava. Use besula l'gzeira shava. Even if she's a beula, there would still be a payment of a knas. Sharini ani koreba, because I'm still able to say in this case that she's a nara ashila orasa. I'm adding the word nara because she is. That's what some of the girsos have. There's number one, she's still a nara, and number two, ashila orasa, she is. Somebody who has not yet been betrothed, as the pasuk says, Shashila Orasa. So we say no. Mistaba, that if I'm going to say that one of the phrases in the pasuk is Lab Dafka, and it's only meant for a Gezerah Shava, and the other one is Dafka, so when does it make more sense to assume that the Knas should be paid? And when does it make more sense the Knas should not be paid? So it makes more sense to say Ashila Orasa is Lab Dafka, and it's only meant for the Gezerah Shava, because her bodily state is exactly the same as it was before, because she wasn't violated beforehand. She didn't have any kind of relations with anybody. Hani ishtani gufa, as opposed to the case of the beula, of a woman who had relations with somebody, even though she was never betrothed. So her bodily state is different. So it makes more sense to say that that's dafka, that besula is dafka, that a beula we're not going to knas at all, because she doesn't have the same bodily state. But the woman who's betrothed and then divorced, her bodily state didn't change. So it makes more sense to say that's lav dafka, that even in a case where she was betrothed and then divorced, there would still be a payment of a knas. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Aisvar Minole. How does Rabbi Yossi Aglili derive that I learned that in the case of onus, where it says 50, that it's really shkolim? In the case of mafata, where it says shkolim, that it's 50, the amount is 50 that's paid. How does if he doesn't have the Gzeira Shava, so how does he derive that? So Nafkale, so he learns from the following, because the Brisa says, Kesef Yishkol and Kimora Bisulos. Then in the case of the Mafate, it says Kesef is paid. It doesn't say how much Kesef is paid, but it says there's a reference to some other payment that is described elsewhere in the Torah, because it says Kimora Bisulos, like the dowry that has to be paid for Bisul. Where do we find an amount of dowry that has to be paid in the Torah? The only place where we find it is in the case of onus, where it says, "V'nasana isha shochevi mala nara chamishim kesef." That's the amount that gets paid for when he takes the woman to be his wife whom he had raped, right? Or he has to pay it in any event. But it's connected to dowry, because it says "Lavi nara chamishim kesef lo siyeli isha," and then that counts as the money that's payable for the entirety of the marriage as well. So we learn from this that there's a connection between mafata and onus, that the case of mafata, the amount of money should be 50, like it is in the case of onus, and more bisulos, in the case of onus, by virtue of this pasuk where it says kesef yishkol kamar bisulos, is compared to the yishkol. So we see that the amount of the 50 kesef that gets paid has to be paid in kesef yishkol, and shkolim, kazet. Okay, so that's how Rabbi Akiva, that's how Rabbi Yossi Galili derives the din that Rabbi Akiva had derived from the Gzeira Shava. So Kasha to Rabbi Akiva. So we point out there's a Kasha contradiction between the two versions of Rabbi Akiva. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva said that a woman who is betrothed, a woman is a nara, and she's betrothed, and then she becomes divorced, so the money, the knas for the rape, and then she's raped, so the money for the rape gets paid to herself. And then the Bryce, it says the money gets paid to her father. So we say, trade tonight, Valiba de Rabbi Akiva. That's okay. there are two versions that Tanaim have of what it is that Rabbi Akiva said, the version of the Mishnah, the version of the Brisa. So Bishlam, Rabbi Akiva de Masnisen, Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, I understand a lot better because Loasik Zeva Shava Mafka Le Krami Pashte Legamri, Zeva Shava does not to completely eradicate the meaning of the words in the pasuk. The pasuk indicates something different happens when you have Ashir Lo Rasa. So yes, the different thing that happens is that beforehand, if she had not been betrothed, so then the money would have gone to her father, and now we say the money goes to herself. Okay, so something happened. We understand that there's some reason why the pasuk said Ashir Lo Rasa, that the din is different if she wasn't betrothed, and then if she is betrothed, we're going to change the din. And Rabbi Akiva the Brisa, according to Rabbi Akiva the Brisa, the din is exactly the same, whether she was betrothed or whether she wasn't betrothed. Either way, if she's raped, the money goes to the father. Rabbi Akiva the Brisa, Asik Zeva Shava Marking Pasha Legame. So Gzera Shava is going to completely eradicate the simple meaning of the pasuk that Asher Lo Rasa has no meaning or import whatsoever, since the din is exactly as if I didn't need the three words altogether, because the din is going to be exactly the same whether she's betrothed or whether she's not betrothed. So Amar Nachman Yitzchak, no. Remember, it doesn't say Asher Lo Rasa v'Nisgarsha. It says Asher Lo Rasa. So therefore, the chiddush is that if she was in fact betrothed and she wasn't yet divorced, and she gets raped while she's in her betrothed state, so the chiddush is that's when the knas doesn't get paid. Amar Nachman Yitzchak, Karibei Asher Lo Arusa. Asher Lo Arusa. That the chiddush is that when she's an arusa, if she gets raped, so then there's no knas that's paid. So we say, well, it's pashut. Then no knas would get paid because we have a din of kamle midarabamine, that since the rapist is going to get skila for having relations with a married woman, because an arusa is a married woman, she's an ashes ish shelo beveis baila, but she's considered to be an ashes ish who hasn't yet entered into her husband's house, but she's still an ashes ish. So therefore, the rapist gets skila. So of course there will be no money paid. So why do I need a pasuk Asher Lo Rasa to teach me that? Arusa bar skila. So we say no. Sakadaita chamina. I would have thought, well, that since the payment of this knas amount of the 50 shkolim is a chiddush, any kind of a knas, a penalty payment is a chiddush, is considered to be a special innovative law. The chiddush Torah, the knas, that the Torah innovates this notion that you have to pay a penalty. So I might think once it's an innovation, so innovations apply regardless of the circumstances. I might think apagav the mikdam mishalim. Despite the fact that the offender, the rapist, is going to be put to death, he would still have to pay the penalty. Kamash Malan Asher Lo Arasa, the Pashup Shara Asher Lo Arasa, when she's an Arusa, that he does not have to pay the penalty. But if she becomes divorced afterwards, so then the penalty is the same. But according to Rabba, the Rabba says that once I do have, in fact, have this chiddush, I do have this innovation that the Torah is mechadish, that the Torah reveals to us that a penalty must be paid. So apagav the mikdam mishalim. So then the penalty would have to be paid even when the offender is put to death. So according to Rabbah, it would follow that the din is that an arusa, if the woman was an arusa and she was raped, that there would be a knas that's paid. It wouldn't be excluded. So ma'ika l'meimer. So then how would you explain Asher Lo Arasa? I don't. Asher Lo Arusa would not be the derivation, because if she's an Arusa, there still would be a payment. So you'd have to say Savalak Rabbi Kiva de Masnisen. According to Rabba's version, according to Rabba's law, that Apagav the Mikdam Mishalim, whenever you have a knas, so we would have to assume that you cannot learn like the version of Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa, because then we would be completely eviscerating the meaning of Asher Lo Arasa. You would have to learn, like Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, that the chiddush is that while normally, if a woman was not an arusa who had been divorced, that the money would get paid to the father. If she was an arusa who got divorced, the money is paid, but it's paid to the girl herself as opposed to the father. And that's in fact how we paskin halacha l'maisa. So Tana Rabbanan, and so we have the rabbis taught what knas l'mi la'avia, some sort of a brisa that teaches us who gets the knas. Who gets the knas? What's the case? So it doesn't say what the case is. So we'll have to start off with the starting assumption that the Brisa is talking about a regular case of rape. Who gets the payment in a regular case of rape? So the answer is that the money goes la'avia. And some say that it goes to the girl. So la'atzma amai, why would it go to the girl? The pasuk says explicitly, if you take a look in Sefer Dvarim, the man who committed the rape pays the money. He pays the father chamishim kesef. We didn't make it up. The pasuk says it goes to the father. So why, in a regular case of rape, would there be a yeshom and would there be a shita that says that it goes to the girl? Of course, it goes to the father. That's mamai. So Amar Chisda Hakam and Arash Nisasim Niskarsha Skin. Chisda says that these two Tanaim in the Brisa here are talking about the case of our Mishnah, Nara, who became betrothed and then she became divorced and then she got raped. Kamipal gave a plukta, the Rabbi Kiva, the Masisim, Rabbi Kiva, the Brisa, and the two opinions of the Tanaim here are arguing about whether we paskin like Rabbi Kiva in the Mishnah, Rabbi Kiva in the Brisa. The one who says that the knas goes to the father, that's like Rabbi Kiva in the Brisa, and the one who says that the knas goes to herself, that's like Rabbi Kiva in the Mishnah. So Amar Abaye makes a statement. He says, Ba'aleh umesa pater. Very interesting statement. He says that the money only gets collected by the father. It says, La via nara, if she's still a nara. To be a nara, she has to be alive. She's not alive, she's a mesa, she's not a nara. So therefore, if the rape occurred, and then there was no court case that took place where there was a judgment that could be rendered, that the money was payable, and before there was a court case, the girl died, the victim of the rape died. So then pater, then the rapist does not pay a knas does not pay a knas to the father in this case because there's no abiyah nara, she's not alive anymore. Shinem.
Before the Gemara din. If she dies after the Gemara din, she still has to pay.
If it's after the Amida Ladin, which Alpipashtis means the Gemara din, everybody uses the Lashon Amida Ladin, even when it's codified by the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, Amida Ladin, Alpipashtis is Amida Ladin means that there's been some sort of a judgment. So they don't use the Lashon Gemara din. But if there was an Amida Ladin, whatever it means, and then she dies, so then the money does get paid to the father. Yeah, then the money does get paid to the father. Because it's only paid to the father of the Nara, not to the father of the Mesa, if there was no court case that took place prior to her death. So Milsa the Pshita the Rava. So this thing that the Abaye assumes that if the Nara dies, that the father doesn't get paid the money is Pashit, is an obvious din to Abaye, but it was a question that was posed by Rava. The boy Rava, because Rava asked, this is not according to the way Rashi learns the Gemara over here. This is the beginning of a sugya that's going to eventually take us to the application of this statement that the Gemara just made. Milsa the Pshita le Abaye Abaye le Rava. Because what's the case of Abaye? Case of Abaye is that she's still an Ara. She's still an Ara, or she still would have been an Ara. She never became a Bogeris. She died when she was an Ara, and now the father wants to collect the money, and Abaye says, no, the father doesn't get to collect the money anymore. So that case is going to be, according to one version, that of what's the Ibaya Rava. The Rava asked the question, that's the question that Rava asked, whether in fact there would be payment to the father in that case. That's even if, let's say, he was able to have a court case, while before that she would have turned the 12 and a half, because it's not past the time that she would have turned 12 and a half. So we say, no, since she's dead, therefore he doesn't get to collect the money. But there's another version of Rava that asks a totally different question. So this Debai Rava, according to the way that Rashi learns, the Dalit is a little bit difficult. You have to say the Dalit de, Debai Rava is de. Pay attention to what we're going to say for the next half a daf, and eventually we're going to get to, the place where there was a suffix that Rava had with respect to this din. But according to the first version of Rava, he had a suffix about a totally different din, and we're going to start with that. To buy Rava, yesh beggar bekever, ain't beggar bekever. Is there a beggar in the kever or not a beggar in the kever? It doesn't mean can you have somebody asking for alms, once they are in the kever. A beggar here means a bogeris. Do we have a din of bogeris? When let's say that a girl died when she was raped, and then she died when she was a Nara, and the court case didn't take place until she would have been 12 and a half years old. Do we say that just like if there's no court case under normal circumstances when the girl is alive until she becomes a bogeris, so the money goes to herself and doesn't go to her father, because once she becomes a bogeris, If she'd be raped at that point, there'd be no money to anybody. But since she was raped as a Nara, now the court case took place when she's a Bogeres, so the money no longer goes to the father because she's in her own rishus, and therefore she gets to keep the money. So do we say the same thing is true when she died and the court case only takes place after she would have been 12 and a half years old, that the money goes to her heirs? Who in the world are her heirs? Her heirs should presumably be her father. Says, no, maybe she had a child. A child from what? Would have had to have been a child from this rape, because if she had relations previously, that she'd be a beula and there'd be no money that would be payable. So if she was raped as an Arab and then she had a child, so would the money go to the child in that case? Yesh Beged Bekever.
According to the Chachamim, they say that not someone in our time, wouldn't she have been raped when she was, 10 and a half, and then this court case took?
No, because
2 years,
because she wouldn't have a child.
And then she had a child with someone else. I mean, she just had a child. I mean, she gets raped when she's 10 and a half. She
Yeah.
has a child at 11 or whatever. And the court case just takes with appeals.
No,
and
she
that,
couldn't.
and
She
a lot of it
couldn't.
in-
She couldn't have a child at 11. If a katana would give birth, she would die. And we're going to see that in a moment.
Yeah.
She couldn't. Okay. The boy Rabbi Yesh Beged Bekever, Ein Beged Bekever. Yesh Beged Bekever de Benahave. Do we say that there is such a thing as her having the din of a bogeris if the court case only took place when she would have been 12 and a half? Well, Dilma Ein Beged Bekever de Aviyah. Do we say no, that there's no such thing as a woman becoming a bogeris if she already died, and therefore, even though the court case only took place after she would have been 12 and a half years old, so the father still gets to keep this money in this case. So then, Maimon Testament Aleph, we ask the question, wait, how could she have a child? Mima Abba, who gets pregnant, and has a child within that period of time, that she was raped as a Nara, and then she has a child, and she died when she was a Nara. We know that a woman can't have a baby after she dies. So she would have had to have the baby before she died. And this is the case where she died when she was a Nara. So how could she possibly have gotten pregnant and then had a child? Even if I say that maybe a katana, she was raped as a katana, it's going like the Chachamim. The reality is that a katana, if she has a child, the child's not going to live. Or she's not going to live. She's not going to. She wouldn't have made it. There are 3 women who are allowed to use the birth control. They're allowed to use a diaphragm, some sort of diaphragm that they had in those days, that was more a little bit intrusive than the type of, let's say, IUD that the women have nowadays, which is less problematic. There's a question here whether this means that they're allowed to use a diaphragm or that they're obligated to use a diaphragm. But Rashi assumes means they're allowed. But Bein Tam says that no, any woman is allowed to use a diaphragm. There's no hashchasas zera over here because of the fact that it's a derech tashmish. This is the normal way of having relations, and she just happens to have a diaphragm. It means that they're obligated to use a diaphragm because they have to stay away from sakana. So this, the whole machlokas Rashi Bein Tam, has all kinds of ramifications with respect to birth control laws. Bisman is that just the important machlokas to know about. Okay, so shalosh nashim mishamshus b'moch eluhain. Here are the 3 women: Katana, Milberis, and Menika. Katana, a girl who's below 12, and Milberis, a girl who's already pregnant, and a Menika, a girl who is a woman who's pregnant, a woman who is nursing. Katana, a girl under 12, Shemet Isape B'Tamos. We're worried she's going to get pregnant. If she gets pregnant, she's going to die. She's going to die. She's not going to last, and the baby's not going to. There won't be a baby born. She's going to die in pregnancy. That's what's going to happen if she's a katana. So therefore, it's not a possibility. If a girl, that the Gemara assumes that if she became pregnant as a katana, then there won't be a viable child because she's going to die. Okay. Milberes shematasa ubasando. We don't allow a milberes. We do allow a milberes to use a moch because we're afraid that otherwise there'll be some sort of either a secondary pregnancy that's going to cause the first fetus to become flattened. Some versions say, well, it could be the second fetus that's going to be flattened. One of the fetuses will become flattened, or it could be that there's no such thing as a woman getting pregnant if she's already pregnant. But what we're concerned about is that the zera is going to separate. Tosfos has this, that the zera in one place, the zera is going to come in between some twins that are in the middle of formation. It's going to break. It's going to sever the connection of the cord between the 2 twins, and therefore it's going to cause one of them to die.
past winter about a woman who got pregnant, secondary pregnancy.
Right, so there's a discussion about it. Eddie Reichman has an interesting article about this as well. Can you have, Yehuda Chizkiah, can you have, a secondary pregnancy when the woman was already pregnant? So Rashi assumes that yes, you can, and this is going to, create a problem that it might cause one of the, one of the fetuses to die, to be flattened. Menika Shema Tigmo Espina, and a woman who is nursing that we're worried that she'll become pregnant, and as a result, she's not going to have the milk to be able to nurse the child, to continue to nurse the child who was already born, and that child will not get the adequate nutrition and will die. Ve'ezu katana, what is considered the age of a katana? But the case of katana, we say it's because she's not going to be able to get pregnant. If she got pregnant, she would die. Ve'ezu katana mibas achas esrei shana v'yom echad ashtem esrei shana. That's from when she's 11 years old until she's 12 years old. V'yom echad. If she's less than 11, then we're not worried that she's going to get pregnant altogether. And if she's more than 12, then it would be okay for her to get pregnant because she can have a healthy baby. So that's what Rabbi Meir says. The Chachamim say, no problem. Ketana, Muberes, Minika, they could all have regular relations because it's going to be a milsa gelo shticha that in the case of the Muberes, that it's going to lead to a secondary pregnancy that's going to cause a fetus to die. In the case of the Menika, it's very unlikely that she's going to have such a shortage of milk that it will cause her a living son to die. And in the case of the Ketana, because we assume that it's a very unlikely outcome that she's going to get pregnant because it's very unusual. The Chachamim agree that if she would get pregnant, she would die. Chachamim agree she would get pregnant, she would die. But they say it's very unlikely that she's going to get pregnant. The Holecha said she could just go on her merry way. And there will be mercy and compassion that will be bestowed upon her from heaven. Because God watches over the simpletons. As my grandmother used to say, God watches over the idiots. And if you say that she's going to become pregnant, Kishinara, that she can become pregnant when she's 12, maybe she gave birth when she was 12 and then she died while she was still an Ara. She can only do that in the space of 6 months because the girl is only an Ara for 6 months before she becomes a Bogeres. Who gives birth within 6 months? It doesn't happen. There's no such thing as giving birth within such a short period of time. And Shmuel says that there is the space between Naras and Bagris is only 6 months. The Chitema Batzer, once a woman becomes a Nara, is only 6 months until she becomes a Bogeres. The Chitema Batzer Hudaleka, that it's only that she can that you don't have less than 6 months between when a girl fully matures and becomes a Bogeres Hatveika, but you could have more than 6 months. No. Ha'ela kamar, it says Ella, that there's only 6 months. It's not a day more than 6 months. Like, for example, I told my my daughter Ayela was saying over Shabbos afternoon, she was very bored. So I said, no problem, I'll learn Daf Yomi with you. So, so I learned Daf Yomi. I say, here, it's all about Bogeres over here, you see. And then we figured out that she became a Bogeres about a month ago, so right. Elahachi kemivayale. So here is I said, so she said, what does that mean? So I said, now if you take a neder, I won't be able to nullify your neder anymore. So she said, Abba, you're frightening me. This is how a rabbi torments his daughter. Do we say that, here's the question that Rava, that according to this first version of Rava, was really being posed. When we say yesh beged b'kever, not the question as to whether the money would go to a child. Of course, there's no child in the picture. Question is, if there was only a court case after the girl who died, unfortunately, before she turned 12 and a half, when she was still an Ara, the court case only takes place after she would have turned 12 and a half. Do we say it's too late for the father to collect at this point in time? We'll puck her up. Odilma ain't beged b'kever. Do we say no? She's considered to be a perpetual Nara because she died when she was a Nara, below puck her up, and therefore the father would be entitled to the money. According to this version, we assume that there would be no money payable to her because she's no longer around, and there's no Yerusha there's no transfer of inheritance of a right to collect a knas. So we say that knas lab mammon hu le'arisha le'avia b'toras Yerusha, as Rashi says. You could have asked that question even when we posed the first version of this version of his question of how could it be that the child would be able to inherit altogether when you can't be Morish Knas. So Tosfos says in Achinami, but we had a better question to ask. So we asked the better question. Okay. So that's the question according to this version. So Mabar Avashi by Lahachi. Mabar Avashi presents a different version of this question. Aliba de Rava, according to Rava, Mabar Avashi says, no, that's not the question that Rava posed. The question that Rava posed was in direct opposition to Abaye's assumption. What was Abaye's assumption? Abaye's assumption was if you have the court case while the girl is a Nara and she had already died, so then we say there's no payment of Knas because the girl is a Mesa, she's not a Nara. So Rava, according to this version, said even if the court case took place before she would have turned 12 and a half years old, there's no beggar bekever over here. The court case took place before she would have turned 12 and a half years old. Rava still had the question. He didn't assume that like Abaye's supposition as a matter of course. Maravashi Bailahachi, Misa Osebagus, or ain't Osebagus. Do we say that when she dies between the age of 12 and 12 and a half, it's as if she has been transformed into a mature woman because her life has ended. So therefore her period of Naros has ended the same way that it ends when she would turn 12 and a half years old. And therefore, even if you had a court case before she would have turned 12 and a half years old, we say it's as if as she's out of the picture and therefore the father doesn't collect. Or ain't no sebagos, so do we say no, that it's considered like the Naros still continues until she would have turned 12 and a half years old. And as long as you have the court case within that period of time, the father could still collect and take you, and he would leave it as an unresolved question. So Rava asked the question of Abaye. It's nice, Abaye and Rava are having, all kinds of disagreements and discussions about this. How often did Rava ask Abaye questions? Right? Rava and Abaye often disagreed with each other. How often did they consult with each other? How many Boimene Rava may Abayes do you have in the Gemara? Right? Anyway. So Rava asks Abaye a question. He says, what if the rape took place and now she became an arusa before there was a court case? Do we say that just like if the court case didn't begin until she became a bogeres, well, the court case didn't begin until she became an asua, so then the money would go to the girl as opposed to the father? Do we say the same thing if it was just that she became nisarsa, she became betrothed? Do we say that that's considered to be like she's moved into a different reshus, a different domain, so that she would be, so that the money would go to her in this case as well, despite the fact that the court case is taking place when she's still a Nara? This question, Tosfos points out, is being posed according to Rabbi Akiva's, the version of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, that says that Nisarsa and Nisgarsha, the money goes to her as opposed to the father. It wouldn't be a question according to Rabbi Akiva in the Brisa, with the father, where we know that the father keeps the money even if Nisarsa and Nisgarsha, so it wouldn't be a question. And it wouldn't be a question according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili either, who says there's no class unless in Nisarsa and Nisgarsha, but in the time of Nisarsa, nothing has really changed at that point in time. So the assumption is the father would still get the money. The question is according to Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah. So Amalei, so Abaye answers, Miksib and Asan Lavi Anara, Asher lo arusa, Asher lo orsa. It doesn't say that you pay the money to the father, Asher lo orsa. Rather, the significance of Asher lo orsa was at the moment of the rape. But if the rape took place before she became an arusa, so even if she became an arusa afterwards, so then of course the father would get to keep the money. But if that's the case, so what do you do with the Bryce that says that if the rape took place before when she's an Ara, and then she became married, not just an Arusa, but she became an Isha Sish Bebeis Pilo. She moved into the husband's house. They had the Sheva Bachos under the Chuppah and they had Yichud and were together. They had a full-fledged Nisuin, and then the court case took place. So then the Atzma, then the money goes, then everyone agrees that the money goes to the girl. So Miksiv and Asan Lavia and Ara Shilo Nesua. The pasuk doesn't say you only give to the father of the girl when she's not a Nesua, and yet everyone says that the money goes to the girl in this case. So maybe she go to the girl in the case where she became an Arusa too, according to Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah. So we say, no, Haki Ashta, this case is different. Hasam, that just like Bagus takes a girl away from her father's domain, in the sense that he's not Zocher and Hamaisa Yadeh anymore, he doesn't get to be Meif in Adarim anymore, and if you read the beginning of Parshas Matos, you see that when a woman becomes an Nesua, the father can no longer nullify her vows. So too in the case of Bagus, where if the rape took place before she became 12 and a half, and the court case only took place after she became to 12 and a half, la'atzma, she gets she gets to keep the money for herself, because it says that the man who had relations with her pays the money to the father of the Nara. That's only if he's the father of the Nara at the time of the Nesina, at the time that the court case determines that the money has to be paid. To touch that a little bit. And so too, so too, the same should apply to Nisuin, since she's completely in her own domain. We know that the father has no rights with respect to her once she becomes a Nisua, so too, the money would go to herself. But the reason Rabba says why it's a question mark in the case of Erisin is because she hasn't completely left the father's domain. Hatanan, because it says Nara Murasa Avio Vaila Mefian Lana Darel, that when a woman, a Nara, becomes betrothed, when she's not yet fully married, so the father still has some rights in terms of nullifying her vows. It's true he has to nullify the vow together with her husband. He can't do it by himself, but he still has 50% of the authority in terms of nullifying her vow. He's a necessary party to nullify the vow. So since he still has a shaykhah, so it's not entirely clear that the Erisin itself would deprive the father of being allowed to collect the money, even if I say that in Arusa ben Iskarisha, that when she became Niskarisha, so at that point in time, the girl collects the money. It's not an all pashut that when she's still in Arusa and the father has this nullifying vow ability and authority, that it's not entirely clear that according to Rabbi Akiva, that at that point in time, the money would go to the girl as opposed to the father. That brings us to the next Mishnah, Anaya Mishnah. Mefateh, no saying Shlosha Dvar. Mefateh, somebody who seduces a Nara, he has to pay 3 different payments, right? He has to pay Boshes, Upigam, Uknas, 3 different payments. And the one who rapes has to pay for 4 payments. So the seducer has to pay for the embarrassment and for the fact that he has diminished her value by making her no longer a virgin. And he also has to pay the penalty payment of 50 shkalim. Most people love honest. We add upon that the man who is the rapist, he also has to pay for the pain she endured. What's the difference between them? Like we just said, the rapist has to pay for tzar, and the onus has to pay immediately, and the mafata only has to pay when he's a motzier, when he had married her, and he now is banishing her, when he's divorcing her. That doesn't make any sense. Who says that he married her? Well, the Gemara will discuss that. The onus, the rapist, has to drink from his flower pot. The water out of the flower pot is considered muddy and disgusting. But the mafat, meaning that the onus is stuck with her for life. If she wants him to marry her, he has to marry her. He's never allowed to divorce her. If he did divorce her, he'd have to remarry her. And the mafat of the seducer, if he wants not to marry her, he's entitled not to marry her. If he marries her and wants to divorce her, he's entitled to divorce her. How does this play out? The Mishnah says, how does it play out that what does it mean that you drink from the muddy flower pot? If you rape the girl, even if she's a cripple, even if she's blind, even if she has some terrible bodily degenerative disease, he's obligated to marry her and stay with her. But if the girl in question had, let's say, committed adultery or some other licentious deed, or she's otherwise not mutaris to marry because she's like a mamzeris or something, so then he's not allowed to be married to her, even if he's a rapist. Means that there has to be liisha haru'uyala, that he only marries a woman who there's a tiyah, that there's a possibility of a marriage according to halacha. But if there isn't a marriage, a possibility of marriage according to halacha, so then there's no obligation and there's no application of the halacha of marrying her. Gemara said, "Tsar demai." What is the tsar paid for? You raped the girl, so what do you have to pay? What kind of pain did she suffer? Some of the fact that he threw her on the ground. So what if he threw her on a silken bed? It was very comfortable. Do we say that? The Torah doesn't distinguish and say that he'd be exempt in that case. You'll say she's exempt. By the time of the Brisa says, Rabbi Shimon Yudah and Rabbi Shimon, onus ain't mishalim as the tsar, that Rabbi Shimon says the onus does not pay the tsar, because she's going to suffer a similar tsar when she gets married. So so they responded to Rabbi Shimon. They said, no, that that you can't compare the tsar of a woman who's raped, and the tsar of a woman who loses her virginity, but she's doing it willingly. It's not the same tsar. So therefore, we see that it's not the question of that she's thrown on the ground, but it's a question because her husband's not going to throw his wife on the ground, but rather it's a question of just the tsar of when a woman loses her virginity, there's a certain amount of a tsar, and we say that it's a greater tsar if it's done by onus. So what's that special tsar? It's the tsar of the legs being separated. As it says, there's a pasuk in Yecheskel. It says, "Batifaski es raglayach lekol over." You opened up your legs for every passerby. So that's the tsar. So if that's the tsar, so why isn't there the same tsar when you seduce a woman and she's having relations for the first time and she has to separate her legs? So it says no. There is tsar, but since she's being seduced, she's forgiving the tsar. It's a dome. It's similar to Adam Shaman Shali. It's like a man who says to his fellow that you can tear my silken garments, be pater, and I'm going to exempt you. So then he gave her an exemption. So to the mafuta, the seduced woman is basically giving an exemption. She's allowing the man to have relations with her. So even though there's tsar, it's like she's exempting him. So what do you mean shali? She can't exempt. It's not her power to exempt him from a payment that otherwise is due to the father. The payment is not paid to the girl. The payment is rendered to the father, as we've said. So therefore, she can't, grant a waiver. It's only the father who could grant the waiver. So what then is the explanation? It's not a question of waiver, but rather Pikoshim and Homos, the very smart and savvy women explain the knowledgeable women say Mafuta ain't latzar. And Mafuta, if it's not a rape, then it's not really a pain. But we see that it can be, painful for a girl when she has relations the first time. So Amabai is not that painful. It's not in the context of rape, it's not that painful. Amaliyim, my foster mother said to me, he was raised, his mother died when he was born, and he had a foster mother raise him. He said, my foster mother told me, it's like you pour hot water on a bald head. Guy's taking a shower, so it's not so painful. Maybe it hurts a little bit, as you get a little bald, but not so terrible. Rava said, my wife, who is the daughter of Rav Chisda, told me, the kusilta. It's like the puncture that's created when a lancet, goes through a person's arm when they're letting blood. So yeah, it's a little bit of a pinch, but not so terrible. But Papa said the daughter of Abba Surah, was his wife, told him, it's like if you have some hard bread that is rubbing against your palate. So, hard bread against the palate. Okay, so it's a tiny little bit of discomfort, but nothing to write home about, and therefore that's why there's no payment of knas that's due. Say that the onus, the rapist, pays right away, the mafata pays when he gets rid of her. Gets rid of her, he doesn't have her to get rid of her. What did he marry her? Where was the announcement in the newspaper? Where's the live stream? Where do we have a marriage ceremony that took place? There was no marriage ceremony here. So what do you mean the shiotzi? So Abai says you have to learn differently. The kashalo yachnos. It means that the seducer only has to pay the 50 shkolim if he doesn't marry her. If he marries her, he doesn't have to pay the 50 shkolim. So Tanya Nami the Brisa says similarly, that the mafata, even though it says the mafata, if the seducer has to pay when he doesn't marry her, Moshe Supagam, no say miyad, that the money for the 50 shkalim only gets paid when there's a decision for them not to get married. But that decision might take a little while until it comes about. But even as we're waiting for that decision to take place, so that money hasn't been paid yet, but the embarrassment, the money for the embarrassment, the money for sullying her bodily integrity and diminishing her value, those amounts have to be paid immediately. In both the case of the rapist and the seducer, both she and the father can say that they are refusing to allow him to marry her. So Bishlam and Mefuta ksib. So I understand the case of Mefuta and Mefuta, both they can refuse and he can refuse. So it says imma ein yima ein. So Avias, it says that there's a Pagzeris Akasuf that says that if the father refuses to allow him to marry the daughter, so then he has to pay the Kesef Ishkol Kimara Bisulos. He has to pay the money. So Ein Avias, the Torah says if the father refuses, he asks for Minayin. How do we know the same thing is true if she refuses to get married? Tamaloma Yima ein. Because it has a double lashon. It says Ma'ain, Yima'ain. Not only if the father refuses, but she can refuse as well. But what about the case of the rape? How do we know in the case of the rape that both of them can refuse? So I know that she can refuse to be married to the fellow who married her. I should hope so, right? We wouldn't want her to, have to go through this ordeal for the rest of her life. She doesn't want the fellow. So Bishlam, we have to look and see what it says. So Bishlam below says which indicates tihiyah. She has to make herself available to him. Midaita. It has to be a decision, a voluntary decision she makes to marry him. But how do we know that the father has the right to nullify the marriage or to reject the marriage? As the father could reject any marriage of his daughter when she's a nara under normal circumstances. It's so why should this fellow, because he raped the daughter, get a better deal? So Rabbi says, I have a kal v'chomer. I don't need shlo yechoti nisker. I have a kal v'chomer. The case of Mefata, he seduced the woman, and therefore the girl was perfectly agreeable. It was only the father who wasn't agreeable. Nonetheless, both she and the father can prevent the marriage. So Be'al dasas was certainly in the case of the rape, where the rapist not only violated the father's das, but also violated her own volition by raping her. Lo kol shekain, how much more so that we should provide for the same rejection rights. So why does Rabbi give a different answer than Abaye? So Rabbi Lomar Kabaye, Rabbi doesn't give Abaye's reasons of chotei niskar because there's no chotei niskar, because the guy has to pay 50 shkalim. So therefore, what is he? He's not walking away with robbing the bank. He's not getting away with anything because he has to pay 50 shkalim. So therefore, there's no chotei niskar. And Abaye didn't like Rabbi's reason, so because he says you can't make a kal v'chomer. The case of Mefata, where the man himself can make the decision that he doesn't want to marry the girl. So we understand that the father can also reject the marriage. But in the case of onus, where he's where he's not allowed to get rid of her, right? He's obligated to marry her if she wants him to marry her. So it's the same way that he can't prevent the marriage. So the father also, we would say, would not be allowed to prevent the marriage. We have another brisa that says, even though it says that the onus, that the rapist has to pay right away. Yep, hold on. If he divorces her, and then since he already paid the money, he already paid the 50 shkalim, she doesn't get more money at the time of divorce. Okay, wait a second. What do you mean when he divorces her? It says lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav. He's not allowed to divorce him. He's not allowed to divorce her. So emek sheteitzehi ein la lav klum. So we mean that if she insists on a divorce, sometimes we have that at the Bezdin, right? A woman asks for a divorce, and the husband, is supposed to give his wife a get. She wants a get, so he gives her a get. So if she requests a get, so that she doesn't get the ksuba money, because she already received the ksuba money as basically the knas payment. And similarly, when if he dies and she becomes an almana, so she also is not entitled to collect ksuba money because it was already paid upfront when he married her and he paid her the 50 shkolim. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, yesh ksuba money. So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, no, she does get a ksuba, but she's not the full-fledged Messiah that a Basula would have gotten when she gets married. She would get Messiah zuz, so she only gets 100 zuz. Money is 100 zuz. So Mamai can be pogi. What's the Tanakam, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda? What are they arguing about? Abundant Sabi. The whole time it might take abundant ksuba. Why is it that the Chachamim made a takana for a woman to receive a ksuba altogether? So that it would not be right for the husband to decide to divorce her, because it used to be before takana Sabenu Gershom, a husband could divorce his wife against the will. So this way he'll think twice before he decides to be Megarisha, because he knows he has to pay the ksuba. So in the case of the rapist, says the Tanakama, there's no need for this takana because he's not allowed to divorce her altogether. So therefore, she doesn't receive a ksuva. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, Sava, Hanami Mitzvah, La'adami, Lobinalach. Rabbi Yehuda says, what are you talking about? It's true that he's not allowed to divorce her, but he can engage in constructive termination. That he can make her life so miserable that she's going to have no choice but to insist upon a get. So it's really coming from her, but despite the fact that it's coming from her, it's because he made her life so miserable. So this way, he has a disincentive for making her life miserable. So she's not going to want to get, because if she wants to get, he's still going to have to pay her ksuba money. He's still going to have to pay her 100 zuz. Onus shows about tzitzos. So we said that the onus, the rapist, has to drink from his dirty flower pot. So Amalei Ravim Parsik, it doesn't matter. He's obligated to marry her, even if she's a chageris or a suma or a mukashkin. So Amalei Ravim Parsikia, the Rabashi, so Rabbi said, Mikle Migma Gami Me'adadi. Since we derive the case of onus from the case of mepatzet in terms of the payment of chamishim shkolim, so maybe we should learn with respect to this as well. That just like in the case of onus, a rapist, we say lo yukal shalchak lo yamav, that he's not allowed to get rid of her ever, and he's obligated to marry her. Maybe the mepato also should be obligated to marry the girl, right? So Amakor no, mahor yim hareno lo lisha lo midaito. We have Xeris Akasav that says that it has to be that he is making a decision, Mahoryim Hareno lo, that he is deciding to grant her a dowry, lo the Isha. So look at the Lashon of lo has the implication of it that this fellow is bringing her to himself, that he's doing it volitionally. Case of Joseph Batzisa V'chule. So what are the cases where we force the fellow to get married, even if she's a chigera, she has a mum, he still has to marry her, but not if she's forbidden to him according to halachos. Why don't we say that the positive commandment of marrying her, Elisha, should override the losase if she's a mamzer, so she's otherwise prohibited to him. So when do we say a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment? You go mila but saras. So that's if you have to perform a bris mila, and the fellow happens to have tsaras, the baby has leprosy. So normally there is a violation that you're not allowed to cut off leprosy. You're not allowed to cut. That's a losase in the Torah. You're not allowed to cut off a leprous sign. But here we allow it in order to fulfill the mitzvah's essay of mila, of performing the bris mila, right? So why is that? It says he shama benegat saras. That's the losa. That's the losa say. And v'yamashmini yimobol b'sar laso is the essay. Kamila b'saras the lo efshel the kiyum essay, but you wouldn't be able to fulfill the positive commandment of the bris milah unless you cut off the foreskin. The foreskin happens to have saras, so therefore you have to violate shama benegat saras. V'hacha yamad lo b'ina mi say the essay klava. Here you could do away with the essay, because the girl has the ability of saying, I don't want to marry him. So therefore, we could just tell the girl, say that you don't want to marry the guy, and then the positive commandment will not be triggered altogether. So therefore, since we can do away with the positive commandment altogether, this would not be a case where we would allow the positive commandment to override the negative commandment. Stop. Okay.